Have you ever heard of someone inheriting a house carved inside a cliff from a relative they never even knew existed? Or a single mother, homeless, exhausted, out of options, who suddenly discovers a secret that could destroy an entire underground government operation? Here's something even more unbelievable. Everything you're about to hear could have happened to anyone. Anyone struggling. Anyone invisible. Anyone forgotten by the world. Until the world needs them. Because this isn't just a story about a mysterious inheritance. It's about a house that shouldn't exist. A vault full of gold no one was meant to find. And a woman who stumbled into a truth powerful enough to get her killed. But before all of that, before the panic alarms, the black SUVs, the congressional hearings, and the questions that still haunt America today, there was simply Claire Ramirez, a mother sleeping in her car, holding her son's hand, praying life would give her one more chance. What she received was something else entirely. Let's begin this journey. Before Claire ever set foot in that impossible desert house, before the headlines and the hearings and the cameras pointed in her direction, her life was a quiet spiral, one of those slow-motion descents you don't realize you're in until you wake up one morning and everything feels heavier than it did the day before. For Claire, that morning happened in the driver's seat of a 2008 Ford Fusion with a broken air vent and a stubborn engine light that stayed on even when nothing was wrong. It wasn't just a car. It was where she and her son slept, wedged between fast food parking lots, all-night grocery stores, and places where nobody notices you unless you become a problem. Most people don't know what it feels like to brush your teeth with a bottle of water while your child is still asleep in the back, or to pray that the security guard doesn't tap on your window before sunrise. But Claire did. She'd been a straight-A student once, someone who believed life rewarded effort. Then came the layoffs, the missed rent, the medical bills that multiplied like they were printed on some cursed paper. In America, almost 49% of people can't handle a $500 emergency, and Claire had been hit with 3 in a single month. That's how fast stability turns into survival. Her days were stitched together by exhaustion and hustle. Mornings wiping down sticky diner counters. Afternoons cleaning motel rooms where people checked in with more money than she'd ever held at once. Nights scanning groceries under fluorescent lights that buzzed loud enough to make you forget your own thoughts. She was invisible to most, but not to her son, Leo, 8 years old, brave, and far too wise for a child who should have been worrying about baseball cards instead of inhalers and eviction notices. Every night, Claire whispered the same promise to him. This is temporary. I'm working on it. I'm trying. And every night she wondered if saying it out loud made her a liar or a fighter. What hurt most wasn't the poverty. It was the erosion of dignity. The way people spoke slower to her, like struggle meant stupidity. The way managers held power like a leash. The way she avoided mirrors because she hated seeing the woman life had turned her into. Tired eyes, skin dulled by stress, a smile that only came when Leo wasn't looking. Yet even in the worst moments, a tiny ember of hope stayed alive in her. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe love, maybe the belief that one lucky break, just one, could flip her whole life around. And still, she kept going. The late-night budgeting, the side gigs nobody talks about, the miles she drove with the gas tank blinking empty. She dreamed of a home with real walls and a door she could lock. a place where Leo could hang drawings on the fridge without using tape that destroyed the car's plastic interior. But dreams cost time, and time was the one luxury she didn't have. The truth is, Claire wasn't failing. She was outnumbered, outworked, outpriced by a world where survival demanded more than any human should have to give. But sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to recognize what you deserve and what you should never settle for again. And on the morning everything changed, when her phone rang with an unknown number and a voice told her she'd just inherited a property from a relative she'd never met. Claire didn't feel excitement. She felt fear, because people like her don't get miracles. They get warnings. But she answered the call anyway. And that choice would crack her world open in ways she never imagined. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the world feels heavy before you even open your eyes. Claire had just stepped outside the diner's back door, apron still damp from the sink, fingers smelling faintly of burnt toast and industrial soap. Her break was exactly 10 minutes, but anyone who's ever worked hourly wages knows those 10 minutes aren't a gift. They're a lifeline, a moment to breathe, a moment to remember you still exist. She sat on an overturned milk crate behind the dumpsters, where the smell of frying oil mixed with the cold desert air, and for once she didn't think about bills or bills or bills. She just sat there, quiet. And that's when her phone buzzed. An unknown number, out of state. Normally she would have ignored it. Scam calls were more consistent than paychecks these days. But something, a whisper of intuition, or just desperation, disguised as curiosity, made her swipe to answer. "Is this Claire Ramirez?" The voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone used by people who never had to clock in anywhere. Claire hesitated before saying yes. "My name is Richard Halden. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Mr. Elias Ramirez." The name hit her like a flicker of static. Ramirez wasn't uncommon, but Elias. That wasn't one she'd heard before, not at family gatherings, not in whispered conversations, not even in the fragments of stories her own father used to share before life had worn him down. The lawyer continued, polite but detached, as if he were reading from a script. "You are listed as Mr. Ramirez's sole beneficiary. He passed away earlier this year, and his property has been legally transferred to you." Claire blinked, the words sinking slowly. Beneficiary, property, transferred. They didn't belong in her world. She was someone who collected coupons, not inheritances. She wasn't supposed to be on the receiving end of anything except warnings from the bank. She asked him if he was sure. He said he'd been trying to reach her for weeks, but her number kept changing. Of course it had. When you live on prepaid phones, numbers disappear faster than hope. Then he said something that made her heart thud in her chest. "It's not a traditional home. It's unconventional. But it's yours, and it's waiting." She felt a chill run down her spine. People like her didn't get houses. They got eviction notices. They got cars towed and lives rearranged by forces they couldn't see. She glanced back at the diner door, imagining Dale, her manager, yelling because she was 3 minutes late. But she stayed on the call. She needed this moment. She needed something, anything, that suggested the universe hadn't forgotten her. The lawyer promised to send documents, maps, photos. He spoke of stone walls carved into cliffs, solar panels hidden in rock crevices, a house built like it belonged in another century. Claire tried to picture it, but couldn't. All she saw was Leo, her son, asleep in the back seat the night before, using his backpack as a pillow. When the call ended, Claire didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She felt suspended, like the ground had shifted beneath her, but she wasn't sure whether it meant she was falling deeper or finally being lifted up. The truth is, life rarely gives you dramatic turning points. Most people don't get thunderclaps or neon signs. Sometimes it's just a phone call during a 10-minute break behind a diner. Sometimes it's a stranger's voice telling you your life is no longer the one you thought you were trapped in. And yet, Claire wasn't naive. She'd learned the hard way that when something sounds too good to be true, it usually has teeth. But she also knew that you can't climb out of a hole if you're too scared to grab the rope. So she made a decision, one small, trembling choice that separated her past from her future. She would go. She would take Leo. She would see this mysterious place for herself, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. Because sometimes the moment that changes your life doesn't feel like a miracle. Sometimes it feels like a risk you can't afford not to take. And just like that, the road ahead began to pull her forward, toward secrets buried in stone, toward a man she never met, and toward the inheritance that would unravel everything she thought she understood about truth, power, and destiny. The drive to New Mexico felt like crossing into another version of America, one where the land stretched so wide it made you feel small in a way that was strangely comforting. Claire had packed everything she and Leo owned into the trunk: 2 duffel bags, a cooler, a few blankets, and a plastic bin filled with documents she couldn't lose. Leo spent most of the trip with his face pressed to the window, watching the landscape shift from city clutter to bare desert, and then to long stretches of nothing but red earth and sky. It was the kind of nothing that made you wonder how anyone ever chose to live out here. But it also felt clean, like the world had been stripped down to its bones. They stopped at a gas station in a tiny town where the cashier looked at Claire as if she'd seen a ghost. When Claire mentioned the property's location, the woman's eyebrows lifted, the way someone reacts to a name they're not sure they should say out loud. "You're going out there?" she asked, her voice hushed. Claire nodded. "Well, folks say strange lights show up on those cliffs, and that the man who lived there didn't talk to nobody. But he paid his bills on time, and that's more than most people do these days. Just be careful." They left the town behind, following a dirt road so narrow Claire kept checking the map to make sure it actually existed. But then, after miles of bouncing over rocks and dry brush, the world opened up, and she saw it. A cliff rising like a giant slab of fire-colored stone carved by time, wind, and something else. And nestled inside it, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was the house. A wooden door framed by rock. Narrow stone steps carved straight into the cliff face. Skylights cut into the stone roof like slivers of captured sunlight. It didn't look real. It looked like something an archaeologist would rope off with tape and declare sacred. Leo whispered, "Mom, is this for real?" And Claire had no answer. The air shifted the moment they stepped out of the car. Cooler, quieter, almost watchful. She climbed the stone steps slowly, running her fingers along the smooth rock walls. This wasn't the work of an amateur. This was engineering, architecture, maybe obsession. Whoever built this had poured years into it, maybe decades. The key the lawyer mailed her was heavy, old-fashioned. When she turned it, the door opened with a low groan that echoed through the spacious stone interior. The first thing she noticed was the light, the way it danced across polished walls through the skylights above. The second thing was the silence. It wasn't the silence of an empty home. It was the silence of a place that had been waiting. Inside, everything was immaculate. Not new, but maintained. The air smelled faintly of sage and clean stone. Solar-powered lights were tucked discreetly into walls. A spring-fed sink whispered softly in the kitchen. The wooden furniture looked handmade, solid, grounded. It was beautiful, yes, but also unnervingly intentional. Then came the first sign that something wasn't right. A sealed section of stone near the back wall, smooth in a way that didn't match the natural texture around it. When Claire knocked on it, the sound echoed hollow, like there was a space behind it, a room someone wanted hidden. She tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was storage. Maybe it was architectural reinforcement. But her gut told her something else. A kind of tension lingered in the walls, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then there were the papers scattered on a desk, as if someone had stepped away mid-thought. Engineering sketches, structural diagrams, notes written in a tight, meticulous hand, calculations that didn't quite make sense at first glance, unless you had a background in energy systems, defense tech, or something deeper, something secret. She found no personal photos, no family keepsakes, no signs of a normal life, just planning, building, watching. It made her think of a bunker disguised as a sanctuary, a place meant to protect something or someone from the world outside. Leo didn't notice the tension. He ran through the rooms, shouting that it felt like a castle. His innocence made the space warmer, almost gentle. Claire wished she could borrow that innocence even for a moment. But she saw too much. The solar arrays hidden on the cliffs, the disguised satellite dish, the water system that looked like it belonged in a research facility rather than a home, and then the journal half hidden under documents. She only read one line before snapping it closed, heart pounding. They'll never find it here. They find here. 3 words that carried weight she wasn't ready to face. Not yet. But even with the unease, even with the strange architecture and the stranger secrets, one truth pulled her back to center. For the first time in a long time. She and Leo weren't sleeping in a car. They weren't counting coins to buy breakfast. They weren't bracing for another eviction notice. This place, whatever it was, offered safety, shelter, a chance. And sometimes, when life has beaten you down far enough, even a mysterious sanctuary carved into a cliff feels like a miracle worth exploring. So, Claire made a silent promise to herself. Tonight, they would rest. Tomorrow, she would search for answers. That night, after Leo fell asleep beneath the skylight that framed the desert stars like a painting, Claire sat alone at the desk where the papers lay scattered. She didn't know why her hands shook as she opened the journal again. Maybe it was instinct, maybe dread. Maybe she already sensed that whatever she found here would change everything she believed about her family, about her past, about her own place in the world. The entries at first seemed harmless. Notes about solar output, water purification systems, structural integrity in desert climates. But gradually, the handwriting shifted. It tightened, grew colder, became the script of a man who lived more in his mind than in the world outside. And then she found it, a name written over and over across the top of a page. Los Alamos National Laboratory, a place most Americans only hear about in documentaries or high school textbooks, spoken in the same breath as nuclear physics, classified research, and the kind of innovation that changes history in ways most people never learn about. Her uncle, or whatever Jonas Reyes truly was to her family, had worked there. The journal entries from that time were clinical, almost detached. Phase testing completed. Security protocols reinforced. Data migration initiated. Must be cautious. Claire frowned at the technical jargon. It read like another language. Fragments of research involving energy systems, materials testing, and something called asset stabilization. She flipped further and found newspaper clippings taped into the pages, headlines about internal investigations, security breaches, unexplained resignations. None mentioned Jonas by name, but the dates aligned with his journal. She read on. Entries from the early 90s were full of confidence. Notes about breakthroughs, cross-departmental collaborations, research teams that worked until dawn, chasing ideas that felt bigger than themselves. It reminded Claire of something she'd lost long ago, the belief that hard work always leads somewhere. Jonas had believed that once too, but beneath the optimism was an undercurrent of warning, as if something within the lab had shifted, something he didn't yet have the courage to write plainly, until one entry stopped her breath cold. They're moving gold, not samples, not symbolic reserves, actual bullion, off the books. If the numbers in the manifests are real, tens of millions have already vanished. This isn't research. This is laundering, funding operations no one wants on record. Claire felt her heartbeat thud in her ears. Gold? In a lab known for nuclear research and weapons development? It sounded surreal, but so had the chamber she hadn't dared open yet. Jonas's handwriting grew frantic after that. Pages filled with lists, names, dates, serial numbers, coded transfers between facilities. He referenced meetings behind locked doors, personnel being reassigned abruptly, conversations ending the moment he walked into a room. He wrote about watching colleagues disappear, not literally, but transferred, dismissed, silenced. The journal became less about science and more about survival. If I report it, I become a target. If I stay silent, I become complicit. They think I'm not paying attention. They're wrong. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, imagining him, this man she'd never met, sitting at this same desk decades earlier, trying to decide whether to risk everything for the truth. She could almost feel his loneliness, his fear, the weight of being one honest man in a place where honesty was treated like a threat. The more she read, the clearer the story became. Jonas hadn't fled to the desert to hide from guilt. He'd fled because he knew too much, because he had stolen evidence, not for profit, but to expose something enormous, because he'd realized the people running the operation weren't just corrupt. They were powerful enough to bury anyone who stood in their way. One entry, written in shaky ink, pulled at her chest. If anything happens to me, someone has to finish what I started. Blood means nothing, but truth means everything. I hope she understands someday. Claire stared at that line for a long time. Was it her? Her mother? Someone else entirely? The journal didn't say, but the emotion behind it was undeniable. This hidden life, this hidden house, this hidden mission. It had all been built around someone Jonas believed could carry the weight he no longer could. As she flipped the page, the journal shifted again, from fear to action. Detailed maps of the desert, blueprints for a facility carved into stone, handwritten calculations on how much gold could be hidden without detection and how to transport it without triggering alarms. Jonas hadn't stumbled into this cave house. He had designed it, built it, prepared it, not as a refuge, but as a vault for truth, a vault for evidence, a vault for someone he trusted more than himself. Claire exhaled shakily. The pieces were fitting together. Too well, too perfectly, for coincidence. And yet, she still felt like she was holding only a corner of the puzzle, because every time the journal referenced the gold, it did so with fear, urgency, and something that felt like guilt. As if the secret he uncovered wasn't just theft, it was something darker, something tied to violence, to people who would do anything to keep their crimes buried. Claire closed the journal slowly, her pulse racing. She could feel the shift happening inside her, the quiet turning of her reality as she absorbed the truth. She hadn't inherited a home. She had inherited a mission, and maybe a danger she wasn't prepared for. But before she could think about that, before she could decide what to do next, Leo's voice echoed from down the hall, soft, sleepy, innocent. "Mom, you okay?" She tucked the journal under her arm and whispered, "Yeah, kiddo, I'm okay." But the truth was, she wasn't. Not yet. She had barely pulled the first thread of her uncle's story, and the whole world was already beginning to unravel. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the skylights like warm ribbons, brushing the stone walls in soft gold. Leo was busy in the kitchen, humming as he poured cereal into a chipped bowl he'd claimed as his own. But Claire felt different. The journal had cracked open a door inside her, one she couldn't shut again. She kept thinking about the sealed section of stone near the main room, the unnatural smoothness, the hollow sound behind it. The journal's words echoed in her mind like a warning and an invitation. They'll never find it here. She waited until Leo settled with his breakfast, then told him she needed to check something. He nodded, barely noticing. Kids assume their parents know everything and fear nothing. But Claire felt her breath catch in her throat as she approached the smooth wall once more. The air around it felt colder, like the stone itself was holding a secret. She pressed her palm against the small indentation near the bottom. Yesterday, it had done nothing, but today she pressed harder, with intention, and heard it. A click, then a low rumble, like ancient gears turning after decades of sleep. The wall shifted inward, just an inch, but enough to make her step back, heart pounding. This wasn't just storage. This was deliberate concealment, built with precision. She pushed gently, and the entire slab swung open on hidden hinges, revealing a darkness so deep it felt alive. Claire lifted her phone, flashlight cutting through the shadows. At first, she thought the room was empty. Then the light struck metal, rows and rows of stacked bars resting on thick wooden pallets. The reflection was impossible to mistake. Gold, real gold. Her breath left her body in a shaky exhale. She stepped inside slowly, like she was walking into a cathedral. The air was cool, metallic, almost sterile. The farther she walked, the more the space expanded, 20 feet deep, 15 feet wide, carved into solid rock like a vault made by nature itself. But nature didn't stack gold bars this neatly. Claire reached for the nearest one, her hands trembling as she lifted it. It was heavy, far heavier than she'd imagined, around 27 to 30 pounds, the weight of a small child. The markings were crisp, 999.9, fine gold U.S. Treasury, serial, number 7K128894. She let out a breath that sounded like a sob. This wasn't collectible gold. This wasn't decorative. This was government-issued reserve bullion. Her mind raced. According to the journal, Jonas had intercepted only a fraction, yet even that fraction, counted quickly, came to roughly 4,000 bars, each worth over $70,000 at current prices. The math hit her like a slap, nearly $280 million, sitting silently in the dark, hidden from the world, waiting. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the stone floor, the cold biting through her jeans. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to process the impossible. She and Leo had slept in parking lots. She had siphoned gas from a lawnmower can to get to work once. She had cried over $5 fees. And now, this, a treasure beyond imagination, one that could lift them from struggle forever. Except the gold didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a weight, a warning, a sacrifice, sealed in stone. And the deeper Claire looked into the chamber, the more she realized this wasn't just wealth. It was evidence, proof of everything Jonas had written. 40 years of corruption, theft, covert funding, off-book operations that would crumble careers and destroy the men powerful enough to steal from the country they swore to serve. She ran her fingers across the engraved serial numbers. Each one was a thread connected to someone dangerous, someone who wouldn't let nearly $300 million vanish quietly, someone who had likely spent years searching, tracking, silencing. Her chest tightened as she thought of Leo. What kind of man hides this much gold? And what kind of people would kill to reclaim it? Suddenly, the room didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a battlefield, frozen in time. Jonas had built this chamber with care, precision, and fear. He'd known they would come. He'd known he couldn't outrun them forever. And now, the responsibility, heavy as the bars themselves, had passed to Claire. She forced herself to stand, to breathe, to think. As she closed the secret door, hearing the heavy stone lock back into place, she whispered something she hadn't said in years. God, what am I supposed to do with this? But the chamber offered no answer. The gold simply waited, silent and patient, like it knew she had no choice but to face the truth that came with it. She looked toward the hallway where Leo was playing with a plastic dinosaur, blissfully unaware. Claire felt something shift inside her, a fierce, protective fire she hadn't felt since he was born. Whatever Jonas had started, whatever darkness chased him into this cliff, Claire understood now that she was part of it, and she would have to choose, run, hide, expose everything, or risk becoming the next casualty. But she also knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would protect her son, no matter the cost. And before the day was over, the danger Jonas feared would find its way to her doorstep. That night, long after Leo had fallen asleep with his small hand wrapped around hers, Claire sat alone in the main room with the journal, the sealed envelope the lawyer had given her, and the weight of the gold still echoing inside her chest. She had been avoiding the letter all day, not because she wasn't ready to read it, but because she was terrified she was ready, terrified of what Jonas might have written specifically for her eyes, decades before she even knew his name. The envelope was yellowed, brittle at the edges, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Her name, Claire Ramirez, was written in a steady, deliberate hand. Jonas wasn't a man who wasted ink. Every stroke meant something. She opened it slowly. The first line stole the air from her lungs. "If you are reading this, Claire, it means they finally reached me." Her fingers tightened around the paper. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Jonas wrote about Los Alamos, not the version tourists saw on documentaries, but the one buried beneath classified levels. He explained how he had joined believing in science, in service, in the idea that knowledge could save lives. But somewhere along the way, the lab had become a front for something else, something darker, quieter, privately funded, and kept alive by men who operated above consequence. They called their covert program Operation Sunstrike. It began, Jonas said, in 1990, publicly as a materials research initiative, privately as a funnel. Gold reserves, quietly transferred under the guise of isotope procurement, rerouted through secure channels and encrypted manifests. Over 7 years, nearly $800 million in bullion was siphoned off, piece by piece, shipment by shipment. Jonas hadn't intended to uncover it. It fell into his hands by accident, misplaced documentation, a mismatched log, a shipment weight that didn't add up. Curiosity became concern. Concern became obsession. And obsession became fear when he realized he wasn't the only one who knew. Sunstrike wasn't about gold. It was about funding off-record operations, covert political interference, overseas militias, development of weapons not meant to exist. Jonas described it as a shadow budget, managed by a handful of men who believed they were saving the country by operating outside the law. He listed initials in the margins, dates, a few scattered names he had dared to write. These weren't faceless villains in a movie. They were decorated officials, agency directors, contractors with Pentagon badges, people who could walk into any room and be welcomed with a handshake. Claire's hands trembled as she read. It felt surreal, like she was holding a script from a political thriller, not a last confession from a man who had lived and died in isolation. But the gold in the chamber made it real. The documents he'd hidden proved it. Then the letter shifted, and Claire felt her chest ache as Jonas's voice softened through the page. "I never met you, Claire. I regret that more than anything, but your father loved you, and he trusted me with one promise, that if anything ever threatened our family, I would protect you." She blinked hard, tears gathering. She hadn't heard anyone speak about her father's love in years. It felt like a stranger reaching out from a place she'd long walled off. Jonas explained how he'd gathered evidence, thousands of pages documenting the theft, the covert payments, the accidents that silenced potential whistleblowers. He wrote about colleagues who disappeared from payrolls, whose families received condolences written in passive, evasive language. He wrote about the nights he couldn't sleep, the headlights he saw on the ridge, the unmarked cars he noticed behind him, the feeling of eyes always watching. The letter grew heavier with each paragraph. He described the moment he realized Sunstrike operatives were planning to kill him. Not publicly, not dramatically, just erase him, remove the problem. That's when he built the house, or rather, fortress. Every detail was intentional, every stone corridor, every hidden camera, every escape hatch. He built a place where truth could survive, even if he didn't. Then came the final section of the letter, a direct message to Claire. I didn't choose you because you're blood. I chose you because you've lived through hardship, because you understand injustice instinctively, because you know how to survive what others cannot. I could not release this truth, but maybe you can. Claire pressed the letter to her chest. She felt exposed, shaken, humbled, and furious. Not at Jonas, at the idea that her entire life, her struggle, her near homelessness, her desperation had been unfolding while one man hid hundreds of millions, meant to expose a machine built on cruelty and greed. She wondered if Jonas had watched her from afar, regretting every moment he couldn't reveal himself. She wondered if he had been waiting for the world to give her a chance she'd never gotten on her own. And then a realization struck her so sharply, she stood up. Everything Jonas feared, everything he ran from, everything he tried to protect, was still out there. These men hadn't stopped. They didn't retire quietly. People who operate in shadows don't just fade into daylight. And now, Claire possessed everything they had tried to bury. She wasn't just an accidental heir anymore. She was a target. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a powder keg waiting for a spark. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and sat in the center of the stone room as the weight of truth settled around her. Her life had been changed by a phone call. But this letter changed her purpose. And as dawn crept across the desert, Claire knew this wasn't simply her uncle's story anymore. It was hers. And the next chapter would demand courage she wasn't sure she had, because the men behind Sunstrike would not let her walk away. For 2 days after reading Jonas's letter, Claire barely slept. Every sound outside the cliff house felt amplified, the wind scraping against the rock, the creak of the wooden beams, the distant echo of desert animals. She moved through the rooms with a new awareness, memorizing every corner, every exit, every shadow that could hide danger. Leo sensed something was wrong, though she tried to hide it. He stayed closer, quieter. Children always know more than we give them credit for. On the third morning, the world shifted. It started with a low hum, barely noticeable at first, like distant thunder rolling beneath the earth. Claire froze. She knew that sound wasn't weather. It was engines, heavy ones. She peeked through the narrow slit of a window carved into the stone, and her breath stopped. A black SUV was crawling along the dirt road, sun glinting off its tinted windows. Then another, and another, 4 in total, moving slowly, deliberately, like predators closing in on wounded prey. No logos, no plates she could read, just a convoy with purpose. Her hands went cold. They had found her. She grabbed Leo and pulled him close, whispering instructions, with a calm she didn't feel. "Stay by me. Don't make a sound." He nodded, eyes wide, trusting her completely. Parents carry so much unseen fear so their children don't have to. The men stepped out of the SUVs, 6 of them, dressed in plain tactical clothing, the kind that blended into the desert. One of them approached the stone steps with confidence, as if he'd walked them 100 times before. He knocked, not politely, not urgently, but with the slow certainty of someone who already knew he would be let in. "Ms. Ramirez," a voice called out, smooth as ice. "We need to speak with you. We know you're inside." Claire backed away from the door, heart pounding painfully. She remembered Jonas's warning, the journal entries about unmarked cars on the ridge, the fear of being erased, and she realized These men weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to ask. They were here to end something. The house's old security system flickered to life as if sensing her fear. The control panel lit up, revealing switches Jonas had labeled in his meticulous handwriting. She hesitated only a moment before flipping the first switch. Floodlights exploded to life outside the cliff face, bathing the men in harsh white light. A second switch triggered a loud siren that echoed through the canyon, bouncing off stone like a warning from the earth itself. The men flinched, surprised, but not deterred. "Last chance, Claire," the voice called. "Open the door." She didn't. Instead, she pressed the final switch, the one Jonas had marked with a single word: blockade. The ground tremored faintly. Then, a slab of stone, hidden high above the entrance, shifted and dropped, sealing the front door behind a thick barrier. Dust burst into the air. The knock became a pound. Then a crash. They were trying to break through. Claire grabbed Leo's hand and ran. Jonas had left her a map, crudely drawn, but clear enough. The escape tunnel. She tore through the main chamber, through the hall, past the sealed vault door that hid the gold. She found the hatch beneath an old rug, one she'd walked over a dozen times, without realizing what lay beneath. She pulled it open. Dust filled the air. Leo coughed softly. "Mom, are we in trouble?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just whispered, "Go! Quickly!" The tunnel was narrow, carved through solid rock, lit only by dim emergency bulbs Jonas had installed decades earlier. The air was cold, metallic. Claire crawled first, pulling Leo behind her. She could hear the banging above grow sharper, angrier. The house trembled as something heavy slammed into the entrance. Somewhere in that moment, deep underground, dust coating their clothes, Leo's hand gripping hers like a lifeline. Claire realized fear wasn't what guided her anymore. It was resolve. She had been running all her life, from debt, from shame, from the world closing its doors in her face. But this time was different. She wasn't running from something. She was running toward the chance to fight back. It took nearly 10 minutes of crawling before the tunnel widened into a natural cavern. A narrow opening at the far end revealed sunlight, weak but real. Claire pushed Leo through first, then climbed out after him, emerging onto a rocky ledge nearly a mile from the house. Below them stretched an open valley. They were exposed, but free. For now. Claire looked back toward the cliff. Smoke rose faintly from the entrance as the men continued to break through. She knew they would find the tunnels eventually. She knew she had minutes, maybe less, before they began sweeping the desert. A sound in the distance, an engine. A lone pickup truck rumbled along the dirt road far below. An older man driving, a beat-up cooler in the back, a stranger who didn't know he was about to save 2 lives. Claire waved frantically, shouting, her voice cracking from dust and fear. The truck slowed. The man leaned out, eyes narrowing at the sight of them on the ledge. But something in Claire's face, desperation, truth, a mother's terror, made him gesture quickly. "Come on, hurry!" They scrambled down the rocks, slipping, sliding, scraping their hands raw. The man pulled them into the truck bed, just as the sun caught the glint of something behind them. Movement near the cliff. As the pickup sped away, Claire clutched Leo to her chest. He trembled against her, but she held him tight, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. The desert raced by in a blur of sand and red stone. And, for the first time since she'd arrived, The Cliff House felt like a memory, one that could vanish in an instant. But the truth Jonas had left behind wasn't gone. It was with her now, and running was only the beginning, because escaping the siege didn't end the story. It lit the fuse. The pickup truck carried Claire and Leo far from the cliffs, farther than the men from Sunstrike could trace, before the dust settled. The old man who had stopped for them, Tom Granger, a retired rancher with sun-creased skin and eyes that still held a spark of decency, didn't ask questions. He saw fear, a mother clutching her child, and that was enough. He dropped them at a rural sheriff's station 2 towns over and wished them luck with a quiet nod. Sometimes heroes arrive, not with badges or uniforms, but with old boots and a truck that shouldn't run as well as it does. From there, everything moved like a storm breaking open. Claire filed a report, careful, measured, just enough to get federal attention. By the end of the day, a team of FBI agents arrived. Not the cold, detached faces she feared, but people who listened, who didn't flinch when she mentioned gold reserves or covert operations. People who understood that truth, no matter how unbelievable, often hides in the places the rest of the world never bothers to look. They protected her and Leo immediately. A safe house, security detail, lawyers who explained what whistleblower protections could offer her, though even they admitted they had never seen a case like this. When she finally handed over the journal, the letter, and the location of the hidden chamber, the room went silent. Agents exchanged looks that carried weight, grave, heavy, unmistakable, the kind of looks that meant, this is real, this is enormous, and this will break something open. The raid on the Cliff House became a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies. Claire watched from a secure location as FBI feeds confirmed everything Jonas had hidden. The gold, the documents, the serial numbers that matched U.S. Treasury logs from decades ago. And just like that, Claire was no longer a struggling single mother who had slipped through society's cracks. She was the key witness in the biggest internal corruption case the country had seen in half a century. The news broke within hours. Every network, every headline, every radio station. Stolen federal gold discovered in New Mexico Cliff home. Whistleblower evidence suggests covert government operation. Single mother uncovers billions in illegal secret funding network. They didn't use her name at first, but they didn't need to. America loves a mystery, especially one wrapped in conspiracy and courage. Within days, journalists were camped outside the FBI headquarters. Analysts debated every detail on late-night talk shows. And somewhere in the noise, something inside Claire shifted. For the first time, the world wasn't dismissing her as invisible. It was listening. Congress moved next. A special committee was formed. Half scandal, half theater, all politics. They wanted answers, accountability, maybe redemption for a system that had allowed Sunstrike to grow in the shadows. They subpoenaed her. Claire walked into the grand, echoing chamber of the Capitol in borrowed shoes and a blazer slightly too big for her shoulders. She sat at the witness table, a single mother in front of cameras, senators, and millions watching from home. But when she looked to her right and saw Leo sitting quietly beside an agent, swinging his feet nervously, she felt stronger than she had in years. They questioned her for hours about the phone call, about Jonas, about the gold, about the men who came for her. Some senators treated her with respect. Others tried to twist her words, casting doubt, searching for cracks. One even implied she must have misunderstood the situation, because how could someone like her uncover something so massive? Claire didn't break. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. She told them everything, her voice steady, her gaze direct. She spoke of injustice, of watching people like Jonas try to do the right thing only to be hunted for it. She spoke of the night she crawled through the escape tunnel with Leo, of the fear that clawed at her throat, of the truth too heavy to keep hidden anymore. When she finished, the room fell quiet. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath, not because she was polished or politically trained, but because truth delivered without arrogance is impossible to ignore. The aftermath unfolded like falling dominoes. Indictments, investigations, quiet resignations disguised as retirements, frozen accounts, seized documents, a financial audit that exposed decades of shadow spending, sunstrike, fractured under the weight of exposure, and people who had once operated above consequence finally tasted accountability. But there was something deeper happening too, something quieter, more human. People across the country began writing to Claire, messages of gratitude, stories of their own struggles, notes from whistleblowers who had once been too afraid to speak. For the first time in her life, Claire felt like she belonged to something larger than survival. She felt purposeful, not because she wanted fame or recognition, but because she knew Jonas hadn't died for nothing. Still, with every headline and every hearing, she understood an uncomfortable truth. The men from Sunstrike may have lost their power publicly, but people like that never stopped fighting in private. The danger wasn't gone. It had simply changed shape. And as the dust settled, Claire made a decision that would define the rest of her life. A decision not born from fear, but from responsibility. In the months that followed the congressional hearings, life didn't suddenly become easy for Claire, but it became different. She and Leo moved into a modest rental house outside Santa Fe, a place with a real porch, a real mailbox, and a kitchen table where homework and late-night tea shared the same space. She didn't buy expensive furniture or chase luxury. After everything she'd seen, comfort meant safety, not extravagance. But even as she tried to rebuild a quiet life, letters kept arriving, emails, recorded messages, people from all over the country reaching out to her, not because she was famous, but because her story had given them something rare, the permission to speak. A nurse from Ohio wrote that she had uncovered a pharmaceutical cover-up, but was too afraid to report it. A young contractor in Texas said he'd witnessed environmental violations that poisoned a local river. A former defense analyst confessed he had information that kept him awake most nights, but he didn't know whom to trust. Every story carried the same plea: help me, show me what to do. And every time Claire read one, she felt the same ache in her chest, the ache of someone who once had no one to call. That ache became her purpose. She used the whistleblower compensation awarded to her, not the gold, but the legal reward, for something Jonas would have understood. The Reyes Integrity Foundation, named not for him or her, but for what he died protecting. It started small: a rented office, 2 desks, 3 volunteers who believed in accountability more than a paycheck. Their mission was simple: to give whistleblowers a place where they could be heard, protected, guided. No judgment, no fear, no hidden agendas. But what began as a whisper grew into a movement. Within a year, the foundation had secured grants, partnered with pro bono legal teams, and become a quiet force in exposing what powerful people hoped would stay buried. Case after case began to unfold, each one a domino tipping into the next, creating ripples across industries that had grown too comfortable in their shadows. The first major breakthrough came from a food processing technician in Illinois who revealed documents showing a company had knowingly distributed products contaminated with dangerous levels of heavy metals. It triggered a national recall and forced the company into a massive settlement. Then came a chemist from Louisiana, trembling as she handed over evidence of a chemical plant's illegal dumping practices, poison leaking into marshlands where children played. Claire stood beside her during the deposition, just as Jonas had once hoped someone would stand beside him. That case erupted into a federal probe that shut down the plant within months. A young software engineer brought forward proof that a biotech startup had manipulated medical trial results to secure investor funding. The lie could have harmed thousands. With the foundation's help, the truth reached regulators before the product did. Each victory felt like a stitch healing a wound no one previously acknowledged, and each whistleblower reminded Claire of the person she once was, scared, unheard, convinced that power belonged only to those born with it. Through it all, Leo watched his mother transform from survivor to leader. He saw her carry stories that would break most people, yet she held them with tenderness and fire. Sometimes he would sit in the office hallway after school, drawing superheroes, telling people, "My mom helps the brave ones." But for Claire, the greatest moment came late one evening, long after the office had closed. A young man, barely 25, walked through the door with a folder held to his chest like a shield. His voice was shaky as he said, "I came forward because I saw what you did. I'm scared, but I don't want to stay silent anymore." It hit her then, deeper than any headline or congressional applause. Her choice to face the truth hadn't just changed her life. It was changing the culture of silence. It was giving courage a place to live. Still, even as the foundation grew and the domino cases multiplied, Claire felt the shadow of Sunstrike lingering. Power doesn't crumble easily. The men who once commanded hidden budgets and stolen gold wouldn't simply accept defeat. Their influence had weakened, yes, but not vanished. And that truth sat with her, quietly, reminding her that her journey wasn't simply about justice. It was about legacy. It was about what she would leave behind, not in gold or documents, but in courage. And 10 years after her escape from the Cliff House, that legacy would be tested once more, in a way she never expected. 10 years passed in a way that only time can explain. Slow when you're living it, swift when you look back. The desert where Claire once ran for her life now felt like a distant echo, a chapter sealed but never forgotten. She still remembered the way the wind sounded on that cliff, the cold weight of the gold bars, the terror she carried like a second heartbeat. But life has a way of softening edges without erasing them. And with each passing year, Claire rebuilt herself in ways she never could have imagined. The Reyes Integrity Foundation had grown far beyond what she once dreamed. What started as a small room with borrowed desks became a network of advocates, investigators, and legal teams spread across multiple states. They trained whistleblowers, protected them, stood beside them through storms that looked impossible, and in the quiet corners of the country where truth once hid in fear, the foundation became a symbol, a candle left burning in a dark room. Leo grew up inside that world of courage and consequence. By 18, he was volunteering at the foundation. By 20, he was studying public policy at Stanford with the same mixture of humility and determination his mother had carried through every battle. He didn't remember the night they crawled through the escape tunnel. Not the fear, not the dust burning in his throat. But he remembered the look in his mother's eyes the first time he asked her why she did what she did. She told him the truth. Because no one else could carry it, so I did. And someday you'll carry something of your own, too. When the 10th anniversary of the Sunstrike exposure arrived, Claire planned something small, a gathering, a quiet reflection. But life, like truth, doesn't always stay small. More than 60 whistleblowers traveled from across the country, people whose lives had changed because Claire said yes on a morning she should have been too tired, too afraid, too broken to say anything at all. They met at the same cliffside home Jonas had built, restored now, strengthened with new supports, and protected as a historical site for government transparency. The house that once hid corruption now hosted conversations about accountability and courage. As they gathered in the main chamber, voices rose like soft ripples, stories of fear, struggle, resilience. A chemical analyst who exposed fraudulent testing, a teacher who reported financial abuse at her school, a veteran who revealed mishandled benefits. They didn't talk about Claire like a hero. They talked about her like someone who gave them back their voice. And then, just before the summit began, a letter arrived, delivered by certified courier, addressed to Claire in a handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly, expecting another thank you message, but instead she found confession. A man who had once been part of Sunstrike, a man who had chosen silence, chosen loyalty, chosen the shadows, a man who now wrote, "You were right to expose us. I'm sorry it took me a lifetime to understand what courage looks like." Claire folded the letter quietly. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it loosens the knots it tied inside you. That evening, she stood before the group inside the stone house, the same walls that once hid secrets, now echoing with truth. She didn't give a grand speech. She didn't need to. She talked about fear, the kind that paralyzes and the kind that pushes you forward. She talked about the nights she had nothing but hope, the mornings she had nothing but duty, and the years she carried a mission she never asked for, but chose anyway. And when she finished, she said something that stayed with everyone there. I inherited a house and gold, but that was never the real inheritance. What Jonas left me, what life left me, was a choice, to hide from the truth or to build something out of it. And all of you remind me that choosing truth is how we keep the world from breaking. Outside, the desert air settled into its quiet rhythm, steady, timeless, unchanging. Leo stood beside her, taller now, his shoulders carrying the early weight of purpose. He slipped his hand into hers the same way he did when he was 8, but now his grip held something new, intention. He whispered, "Mom, what happens next?" Claire smiled softly, watching the last rays of sunlight drift across the cliffs. Jonas once walked alone. "Next," she said, "we let the truth keep working, and we make sure it never gets buried again." Because the real legacy wasn't gold-sealed behind stone walls. It wasn't the collapse of Sunstrike. It wasn't even the foundation that rose from its ashes. Her true legacy lived in every person who learned that one voice, one scared, ordinary, determined voice, could shift the balance of power in a world that often forgets the value of honesty. It lived in every whistleblower who refused to stay silent, in every hidden truth dragged into the light, in every generation that would grow up knowing courage doesn't come from power. It comes from choosing what is right when the world tells you to look away. And as the night settled over the desert, the house stood quietly against the cliffside, no longer a vault of secrets, but a beacon, a monument to the simple, unbreakable idea that truth, once uncovered, never truly dies. Follow us for more stories about truth, bravery, and the unseen heroes around us.